conferences, and social events. It also provides for internships, fellowships, and mentorships. The Humanities Edge program is for students who seek to go beyond the classroom and enhance their scholarship in the humanities. Go to humanitiesedge.fiu.edu for more information. About Dr. Bauman. Whitney Bauman is Associate Professor of Religious Studies at Florida International University in Miami, Florida. He is also co-founder and co-director of Counterpoint Navigating Knowledge, which is a nonprofit based in Berlin, Germany, that holds public discussions over social and ecological issues related to globalization and climate change. His areas of research interest fall under the theme of religion, science, and globalization. He is the recipient of a Fulbright Fellowship and a Humboldt Fellowship. His publications include Religion and Ecology, Developing a Planetary Ethic from Columbia University Press of 2014, and co-authored with Kevin O'Brien, Environmental Ethics and Uncertainty, Tackling Weak Problems from Routledge in 2019. He is currently working on a manuscript about the 19th century German Romantic scientist Ernst Haeckel.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Sorry, Dr. Bauman. Mike Matthews the director of the Earth Ethic Institute, wanted to just say a quick word. So, Mike, if you want to come on, that would be great.
Thank you, Professor Jacob. Very much looking forward to this talk. I just wanted to quickly mention to everybody that this talk is also part of our Sustainable Cities Campus Learning Community Symposium. And I'll drop the link in the chat to the entire schedule. We have different talks, presentations, film screenings, performances happening throughout the week, and you are all invited to attend these. We actually had my assistant just drop those links in the chat, so please check them out when you have the chance. I also wanted to mention that this campus learning community is looking at Sustainable Development Goal number 11, making cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And in particular, as part of this goal, there's goal 11.4, which aims to strengthen efforts to protect and safeguard the world's cultural and natural heritage. So bearing this in mind, I'd like to offer this statement recognizing Miami's original inhabitants. At Miami-Dade College, we acknowledge the indigenous peoples on whose land we stand, the Miccosukee and the Seminole tribes who remain unconquered, and the Tequesta tribe who first occupied the land that is now downtown Miami, and so represent ties to both our prehistoric and historic past. Miami-Dade College is grateful for the unique knowledge and ways of being, as well as the profound connection to our South Florida ecosystems that these indigenous tribes represent. We look forward to strengthening our relationship with both Miami's indigenous peoples as well as the natural world. So with that, I am very much looking forward to hearing Professor Bauman's talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so shall I go now? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Mike and Sarah. I really appreciate this this invitation. It's great to be here. Where is here? Right now, I'm still in Miami Beach. I head back to Berlin in just a few weeks. So I am at least in the same place as probably many of you at the moment, even though we're all a little virtual right now. So my talk for today is called Developing a Critical Planetary Romanticism, or DPR for the Earth. It's a sort of catchy little name that I came up with, you know, because you've got to have a sexy name to get people's attention. So CPR for the Earth seems to work there. But basically, this arises out of my long interest in sort of how we've thought ourselves outside of the rest of the natural world, and then how can we rethink ourselves back into the world. And so that's what I want to mostly focus on today, is this this idea of developing a critical planetary romanticism for the Earth. And I usually start this, if you've ever been in a lecture with me, by sort of asking, what comes to mind when you think of nature. And if we were in a classroom setting right now, I would go around and have you list those off. But since we're online, it's usually often the answers are something like, the ocean or mountains or the Everglades or trees or a whale or something like this. It's less often humans, the downtown Miami, these computers that we're all communicating through, and this sort of thing. And so that's where I begin, is how have we written ourselves and our cultures and our technologies outside of the planet, and how can we write ourselves back into the planet? Before I get started, though, I do want to start with some thanks. Thanks to Sarah Jacob and the Environmental Humanities. It's not program. I got that wrong, didn't I? It's the Environmental Sustainability. Let's see. How is this called? The Humanities Edge program of MDC. So I thank you very much for this invitation. This represents about 5 years of work. So this is all going into this new manuscript. And so I want to thank the Seminar on Religion and New Materialisms at the American Academy of Religion. I'll say a little bit more about what the new materialisms are in a moment. The Alexander Humboldt Foundation, which allowed me to do 2 years of extensive research in the archives of Ernst Haeckel in Jena in Germany. The Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict at Arizona State University, where I had a series of lectures last year. The Journal of the Society for the Study of Religion, Nature, and Culture, which is publishing pieces of this. And also the Wilsonian Public Humanities Lab at Florida International University, which gave me a small grant to look into the archives of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and Rachel Carson this past year. All of this is sort of feeding into this lecture day. So I just want to give thanks where thanks is due. Of course, at some point I should probably thank the Earth and the universe and all these sorts of things. But we'll just sort of bracket all these things to right here, these immediate things. So I want to start here with a centering quote, and this is from Anna Singh's project on the internet called Feral Atlas. It's a really cool project. You should check it out. I left the link there for you. But she writes here, other species as well as non-living things make it possible to be human. That this is not obvious to many humans at this moment in time is only because of habits of thought that have become powerful over the last few hundred years. In this modernist mode of thinking, humans presume to transcend and master nature, rather than forming worlds together with non-humans. One significance of recent discussion of the Anthropocene as a time of human-sponsored environmental crisis is that it urges us away from those powerful habits of thought. The imagined mastery of humans no longer looks so successful. We are asked to reconsider the ways in which human and non-human histories are inextricably intertwined. The Anthropocene, like every other trajectory in which humans have been involved, is more than human. And so this is sort of a quote that helps me to think about humans entangled with the rest of the planetary community in a way that I think sort of the modern Western world has lost sight of. And part of this entanglement and the recognition of this entanglement, I think, involves a specific understanding of religion. I'm a religious studies professor, and even though I know that many of you are probably nuns, that is, you don't report to adhere to any of the major world religions, I would bet that you still make meaning out of your lives, and you still get up every morning and think about your life in terms of having purpose and value and this sort of thing, right? And so my point about religion is that it should go back to the root of the etymology of it, which is religere or religare, meaning to reread or to bind together, right? So religion at its heart is just a process of pulling together information, right? And this constant retelling of information in a way that makes meaning out of our lives, right? This is at the heart of the Latin term of religion. And this is a constant process, right? This re part makes it a constant process. It's not a noun. It's a verb, really. We are religioning. We are meaning making. This is why I prefer to think of it as something like reattunement. For one, this idea of reattunement, tuning into something again and again, works at the aesthetic level. It works at the ethical level. It works at musical level. It works at bodily levels and intellectual levels, right? To get in tune with something is a very embodied, but also intellectual and even spiritual, if somebody wants to use that word, process, right? And it is an ongoing process, right? And there are multiple bodies involved in this attuning, right? Because we're all tuning in together, like the beginning of a symphony when all the instruments are trying to tune themselves in at the beginning. It sounds like a cacophony, right? This is sort of this process of attunement, right? And this really is, I think, a planetary process over and over. As bodies evolve and change and shift, all the bodies are in this process of reattuning to one another, and we reattune until we die and become equilibrium, right, with the life around us. And I think that in some ways this works to discuss sort of the history of world religions. So if you think about sort of Buddhism and Jainism, and the purpose of meditation is awakening to the true, right, attuning to the true reality, or yoga and meditation traditions that are about getting the body in tune with energies and the world around you, right? Getting into your body and having your body be in tune with the world around you, this sort of thing. Or the calling out of injustices that we find in not just in monotheisms, but particularly in monotheisms with Abraham and Moses and Jesus, calling out the injustice of the empires around them and saying we need to have a different way. We need to reattune to the situation around us in a way that includes more bodies, right? Or we can think about shamanic journeys and boundary crossings, right? That the purpose of these journeys is to help us reattune to the world around us, right? Once we think that we know what a human is and what a tree is, and what the shaman and also the trickster serves to move to blur these categories and say, actually, we are more porous than we think, and we need to constantly reattune to the new realities around us. So there's many ways in which these things that we think of historically, traditionally, whatever you want to call it, as religions, work on this metaphor of reattuning to the world. Obviously, there are many other ways that religions are oppressive and this sort of thing, but I'm just sort of talking about how these religions might fit into this process of reattunement at the moment. But it doesn't have to be a religion, right? Over at the University of Florida in Gainesville, the Religion and Nature PhD program, the only one of its kind in the country, also looks at many things outside of what we would think of as religious traditions for these reattunement process, these sort of spiritual processes. So we can look at biking, right? How does biking reattune us to the places in different ways than moving in a silver bullet on highways or whatever does? So how can biking or hiking or fishing or even surfing, right? Reading, sex, environmentalism, and other types of activisms, right? Help us to reattune to the worlds around us, and in this way help us to make meaning and out of our lives and the sort of larger planetary community. And I also think here the sciences can be helpful, right? So in many ways, the science of ecology and evolution have done more to help us reattune to our contemporary worlds than any other sciences. They are indeed, I would say, queer sciences in the sense that up until the theory of evolution becomes sort of adopted by science, starting with Darwin, and although there were people talking about it before, and sort of not everyone is on board with evolution still for whatever reason, but the science of evolution is queer in many ways. So first of all, I say that because it does away with essences and forms, right? So things are not created with essences set in separate forms, right? So there's human and dog and this sort of, and there's male and female. No, these forms evolve, essences evolve, right? So we're all part of this sort of biological gloop that evolves over time into many different things and out of each other, right? So this idea that there's separations between humans, animals, and plants just doesn't hold under that. And that's the reason I say it queers the boundaries of the different species and organisms that we've created. And in some sense, as Ernst Haeckel might say, species are nomenclature, right? They help us organize things, but there's really no hard boundaries between species from an evolutionary perspective, right? And also, what does this mean? It means that we can host a wide range of diversity, right? If you think that, for instance, as in the monotheistic West, right, that God created male and female, right? Well, those are your two options, right? But if you look to the rest of the natural world, there's all sorts of different sexes and sexualities, hermaphodisms, organisms that change sex throughout, asexual organisms, gay organisms, so on and so forth. That if this applies to the rest of the natural world, why wouldn't it also apply to the human community, for instance, right? So this is why I say sort of evolutionary theory is, and the science of evolution is helping us to reattune to this entanglement historically and contemporaneously. And ecology, I understand as a queer science, if you will, is because ecology is basically, one way to think about it is the our internal world, right, that we pick up from our lives around us. So our inside, our creativity and is a reflection of the ecosystems and biodiversity that are around us, right? So we sort of internalize life around us, and our guts are full of the flora and fauna that are in the environment around us, and this sort of thing. Our skin is porous. Things move in and out all the time. We are part of these ecosystems, right? We're not sort of beyond it, right? So ecology too is sort of blurring the boundaries between self and other, human and non-human. We understand more through the microbiome project and things like it, the human body as itself an ecosystem, and then we're part of a larger ecosystem, right? So there's all these scalar ways that we can look at ourselves and other animals within an ecological perspective, right? So these types of things, right, help us to reattune ourselves to the bodies around us that we're co-evolving with, and reintegrate ourselves into the rest of the planetary community, right? And so here is why I think this is important. Our current moment is probably defined, our current moment in time, I think, is defined more by two phenomena than anything else, and those are globalization and climate change. And they're related, although not identical. So globalization, right? Globalization is the process of the increase and speed of transportation, communication, and production technologies, right? So the great acceleration since World War II of the fossil-fueled pace at which we live, right? That means that on a daily basis, our lives are crisscrossed with information, materials, energy from all over the globe, right? Even if we stay in place, the things that we eat and drink and breathe are coming from all over the globe. There is no place that isn't constantly, and on the planet that's not constantly intersected by these global flows of energy, information, and materials. Same with the cultural globalization, right? We can't sort of look at, to take religion as example, you can't look at Christianity, Judaism, Islam. No, these things are all tied up together in their development historically. Not to mention, they are drawing from the background ancient Near Eastern traditions, so ancient Mesopotamian religions and Babylonian traditions, so on and so forth. Same with Hinduism, Jainism, and Buddhism, right? These traditions all have to be thought of together historically, and one way to think about them is that Hinduism is what's left over when the Buddha and Lord Mahavir of Jainism break off from the background Vedic tradition, and then you have Hinduism, right? So, but my point is that historically, these are a mixture of traditions, and contemporaneously, all of our languages and cultures and traditions are also mixed up, right, through communication technologies and travel and these sorts of things. And some of these things are good, right? and others I don't think others are problematic. One of the things that's problematic is that the way that this global happen is again through this fossil fueled technology, right? We live at this breakneck pace of fossil fueled reality when we can be propelled around the planet in a single day, right? I'm quite guilty of this from living in Berlin and Miami, right? So I kind of live between these two places. Is that sustainable, right? Or is there a different pace at which we can move around the planet that doesn't outstrip the regenerative capacity of the planet, right? So maybe we shouldn't move at a fossil fueled pace, but a renewable energy pace, right? Maybe we shouldn't move at the pace of jet fuel, but rather at the pace of, I don't know, solar ships or something like this. So my question, so I don't want to say that globalization is problematic because it's caused climate change, and therefore we ought to all go back to our own places and stay in there, right? And keep out the outsiders and return to nationalism and localism. That's not what I'm arguing for here at all. But might there be a different way forward beyond sort of a return to localism and nationalism, or the continuation of neoliberal globalization as usual, with sort of what the Democrats want to do in this country, attach on labor and environmental protections, which of course doesn't quite work. So is there a third way possible, right? And this is where the critical planetary romanticism is going to come in. But I will say that there, this process of globalization and climate change together has shaped some of the current need and feeling of the need for reattunement, right? And so what I will say is, the pandemic has sort of highlighted the failure of neoliberal globalization and also the problems of climate change in many ways. Neoliberal globalization is tied up to sort of heteronormativity and white supremacist heteronormative hierarchies and backgrounds, right? And so for me, the I can't breathe of the Black Lives Matter movement, right, coming to head during this pandemic, and the I can't breathe from COVID are of a same tapestry, right? They're of the same problem. The Me Too movement, the I can't breathe of women in a sexist patriarchal world, right? The Dakota Pipeline moment, the I can't breathe of indigenous people in settler colonial world that's fueled by fossil fuels, right? Species extinction due to climate change and pollution and these sorts of things. The I can't breathe of other species, right? The literal taking away of the breath of life, right? That has been forced on the planetary community is now sort of highlighting this apocalyptic moment, I would call it, right? An apocalypse is not the end of everything. It is the uncovering, it's the end of something old and the uncovering of something new, so, right? It's the unveiling of a new way of being in the world, right? It's not the end of all, right? And in fact, we can learn from African American communities whose historical cultures were placed under apocalypse when they were enslaved and brought to the Americas, right? That was an apocalypse of a former way of being. For many Native peoples, right? They're through colonization, they have lived through an apocalypse, right? And they are continuing to live in new ways, to reattune in new ways, and to help carry on older traditions, but in a new world, right? Because the old one does not exist anymore. So we can learn, actually, I think, from other peoples around the world who have gone through an apocalypse before, and sort of help us uncover ways to help live through this current apocalypse, right? And so what I would say is that this sort of current moment of reattunement, I would describe it as the need for us to reattune to the bodies around us that make up the entire planetary community, right? So not just humans, but the rest of the planetary community in which we are entangled. However, this can't be done willy-nilly, right? But not everybody experiences the world the same way, depending upon one's embodiment in terms of race, gender, nationality, so on and so forth, right? Our body, ableism, right? Our bodies don't all experience the worlds in which we co-create in the same way. Some bodies are privileged over others, so we always need this critical moral, ethical tools to guide us in these reattunements. There is no sort of one sort of natural universal reattunement or right attunement to the world, right? There are just different attunements. And that's why we need the critical part of the critical planetary romanticism in order, and every time we're reattuning, right? And so here's what I mean by this sort of critical planetary romanticism then. And this is, again, my third way that's a way between between sort of a return to nationalism and localism, which we're seeing all over the world with Hindu nationalism, Trumpism, and you know, you see in Poland, you see the AfD, the rise of the right again in Germany, you see this in Indonesia with the rise of a very conservative form of Islam, you see this in China, so on and so forth. The closing of borders, and the circling of the borders that says no, we want to keep these people out and keep us in and sort of save our people and not yours, right? This doesn't work, right? We've tried this before. We fought world wars over this. We are, through globalization, we're tangled together and there's no untangling. And so it can't be that sort of nationalism, but it also can't be the same fossil fuel neoliberal globalism that has been promoted ever since Ronald Reagan by both Republicans and Democrats alike in this country, right? And perhaps we can add on environmental checks and balances and labor checks and balances, so on and so forth. But still, we should just continue with this sort of globalization of neoliberal capitalism. So it can't be that either. So then what is a different way? This is my third way, right? Harkening back to the hope for a third way during the Cold War. But this is my third way. It's this sort of critical planetary romanticism, or CPR, for the Earth. And I want to start here with the last term and work my way backwards. So I want to start with romanticism. What do I mean by romanticism? I mean that that agency and vitality are distributed throughout the world, right? I mean a sort of a form of animism or pantheism, right? That says that value, agency, and vitality are a part of all of life and not just human life. So the modern Western scientific sort of reductive model has sort of narrowed value and vitality to in many ways to just the human, despite the sciences of evolution and ecology that tell us otherwise, or despite the science of quantum physics that tell us otherwise. There's still this sort of reductive and productive model of science, right? How can we use things to make life better for human beings, or certain human beings, right? So this sort of romanticism says, no, we need to re-engage with our entanglement with the rest of the natural world and recognize that we are acted upon, and we don't just act upon other things, but we are acted upon all the time, other organisms and life throughout the rest of the natural world. I didn't do anything for, you know, my opposable thumbs, or the language that I have, or the way in which my gut digests things, right? I didn't do that, right? This is the world acting upon me as well. So that's what I mean by romantic, right? And then planetary, I mean that, again, it can't be romanticism that's tied just to one local place, right? But it has to see how all places are connected together on this planetary scale, right? So humans are creatures among creatures. That's one thing. We are planetary citizens among others. But also we need to start practicing what I call polyamory of place, right? This monogamy of place, when tied to romanticism, can quickly lead to nationalism and quickly lead to sort of a lot of centrisms that are not helpful, right? And so I think that we need something like a polyamory of place, that the multiple love of multiple places and how they're connected together on a planetary scale, right? So the scope of this romanticism is not sort of the mere rainwoods, or the mere old growth red trees woods, and it's not sort of just the Everglades, but it's those things, but it's also love for multiple places, right? And how they fit together. Because this sort of out in my backyard thing doesn't work in a globalized world. And then also, finally, we need the critical part, right? We need critical theories to show the multiple ways in which we experience the worlds that we're a part of, right? So we need critical race theories, we need disability theory, we need queer theories, we need feminist theories, we need neo-Marxist theories. You know, all these sorts of things that show that there's not one way to reattune to the worlds in which we're in, and not all bodies are treated equally in these worlds, right? So we can have these multiple worlds. None of which is the sort of single world that all worlds should fit into, but the planetary is sort of the tapestry that contains all these worlds, right? So we can co-construct many different worlds, and at any given time, these multiple perspectives and these multiple worlds are what make up the planetary community, right? And sort of the planetary is sort of the emergent sort of edge of unity that brings together all of life on the planet at any given moment, if you will, something like this. That's sort of my idea of this critical planetary romanticism, and it draws off of, you know, the new materialisms, which come out of the work of not only process thought, but Deleuze and Guattari and many others. But it's basically this idea of a form of open-ended pantheism. I don't want to call it panentheism or anything else, but not a closed pantheism, but an animism or a world or a planet that is constantly an open, evolving, emergent process, rather than something that is closed off and predetermined, right? So that's this idea of the critical planetary romanticism. And whoops, here we go. And sort of this is the last part I want to end on here, is sort of what this can do for us, right? So what this can do for us, right? As we, this by the way is sort of how I imagine, it's a metaphor, it's the starling murmurations, right? And a starling murmuration sort of, it has order, right? But it's not a predefined order, right? It's a chaotic emergent order, and sort of there's definite order in the way that the different starlings follow each other in these patterns, but it's not a predetermined order, right? And so that's kind of my imaginations for the planetary community, right? Is that that's how we're coming together, right? There's no telos, there's no end, there's no single goal, but we're creating order as we go along, co-creating order as we go along. And so my thinking about this is my final thoughts on the matter for now, and then we'll go to some question and answers and discussion. But one of the things that I like about this sort of experimental approach to meaning making is that we can co-construct these worlds and our institutions around it, and then see how our ideas and our values and our laws and our economics ripple out to affect different bodies differently, right? And then once we sort of do this cartography of our meaning making practices, we can see which bodies are being harmed by these meaning making practices, because there's no one practice that's going to fit all. So we can sort of follow Rob Nixon's implications of sort of a cartography of violence. We have to do this cartography of violence, not just of pollutants and stuff like this, but of our ideas, right? And see how they affect different bodies differently. And then once enough bodies, as we see these sort of bodies piling up on the outside of these meaning-making practices, then it's time to reconstruct to include more bodies in our meaning-making practices, right? And this is a process that just goes on ad infinitum. So we collect, if you want to use Latour's language, we collect, we assess, and then we undo and collect again, right? Ad infinitum. We collect ourselves together into some sort of meaningful whole, and then we assess, you know, how this way of living is affecting others and different bodies differently. And then we undo this meaning to allow for new meanings to come in, right? So it's this process of creation, apocalypse, creation, apocalypse, creation, apocalypse, this sort of thing, sort of ad infinitum. But to me, this is a much more experimental approach to meaning making, rather than saying, this is my idea and it's true for all times and all places, right? Okay, and so finally, what I think this will take, and this is for all of us that are part of university systems, and I think the environmental humanities is already doing some of this, and other programs too. But is that we need to undiscipline the university, right? We need to have wild thoughts and wild thinking, undisciplined thinking, because the very disciplines that structure the university now are the very disciplines that were there in the 19th century that got us into our way of thinking in the first place, right? So how can we need to practice this approach of collecting and deconstructing and recollecting again with the university disciplines, right? What disciplines would the flourishing of the planetary community require of us, right? Not sort of what are the humanities and what are the sciences, right? But what does the planetary community need from us in order to flourish, and sort of think our disciplines maybe along those lines. And of course that'll be a moving target, right? But nonetheless, that's sort of my idea about the university within this whole sort of critical planetary romanticism. And I'll stop there and take questions and such. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bauman. That was just really interesting and eye-opening, and there's tons of questions that are in the chat, which Veronica is going to moderate. Before Veronica does, though, I'd just like to ask everyone if they could just aim their telephone camera at this QR code. And just it's a very, very, very short survey that we are required to do. If you can, just please take the survey. That'd be very helpful for us. But now, Veronica, if you would like to moderate. By the way, anybody can just, put up their hand and Dr. Bauman can call on them too. But I thought first we could go through the questions.
No, I'll let somebody moderate because I can't really see on this program how to do that. So.
Okay, all right. So Veronica, please go ahead.
Yes, so the first question is by Mike Matthews, and he's asking, do you see a distinction between religion and spirituality?
Okay, so that's a fair enough question. A lot of people, I think right now the trend, as it was in the spiritualist movement of the early 20th century, I think that the trend now is to move towards sort of spirituality and not religion and this sort of thing. But I think that the distinction is sort of a false one. It's like, what is religion, right? And every religious studies professor will give you a different answer. I like the word religion because I do think that it's more than just a sort of a practice of meditation and sort of the spiritual things that you might think of, right? Like a sense of oneness and this sort of thing. I think it's more than just that experience, but that it's actually also based upon that spirituality. We also so think of spirituality maybe as like the energy and the experiences, whereas religion is then sort of how we think about them and reflect upon them, right? And sort of how we make meaning out of it. And so I think that they're equally important. And I think that someone said it before, right? A religion without spirituality is sort of becomes fundamentalism or something like this, and spirituality without religion is just basically solipsistic, right? It's just whatever you feel and sort of not putting it into any sort of order and this sort of thing. So I think that both are needed, and I understand that some people don't like either, and so that's why I think it's call it what you want to, but if you know what I'm talking about when you sort of have experiences of awe or wonder and this sort of thing, and in whatever setting, and then you can also put those experiences into a narrative and a meaningful whole, then you'll know what I'm getting at when I use the word religion.
Thank you. And the next question is from Lisa. What is your thought on post-human theory literature?
Posthumanism?
Post-human theory.
Yeah, okay, so posthumanism.
Post-human theory / literature, and this might well, maybe you can address two questions at once, because we have a question on postmodernism too, about your thoughts on postmodernism. And the askers of these questions, if you want to turn on your mic and clarify the question, feel free. You can do that.
Okay, well, let me start, I guess, with posthumanism. And I will say this, I'm on board with sort of a lot of sort of speculative fiction, like you might find in Afrofuturisms or Donna Haraway's stuff, and this sort of thing that sort of think about the evolution of humans beyond humanity, right? I'm down with that form of posthumanism, because I think that if we're not just going to reify the human indefinitely into the future, then we can't just impose our category of what it means to be human onto the future indefinitely, right? We have to think of ourselves as sort of this evolving part of the rest of the planetary community. The posthumanism, and that does include our technologies and our language and this sort of thing. But the posthumanism I don't like is the one that is sort of based upon only technology and sort of preserving human consciousness and going into space and taking the human consciousness out into different planets and this sort of thing that sort of leaves this planet behind, and most people's with it. That's the posthumanism that I think is unhelpful, because it's just a continuation of this anthropocentric idea that the only thing that matters is human consciousness, and I don't think that. So there are different understandings of posthumanism, some of which I feed from, and others which I vehemently reject. And one example is a woman named Nancy Abrams, and she writes this book called the God Who Could Possibly Be True, or something like, or the God We Could Think of as True, something like this. Maybe somebody here knows the name of the book. Anyways, I was at this little conference with her, and sort of for her, the best thing the universe, mind you, 13.7 billion years of cosmic expansion has produced is human consciousness, and we ought to preserve human consciousness at all costs, even if that means sloughing off our bodies for silicone and mainframes and this sort of thing, right? And so I actually asked, well, look, I'm a short-term optimist and a long-term pessimist. I'm a short-term optimist because as long as we're still here and living, we can do stuff and save the planet. But eventually the sun's gonna expand out, fry the earth, and that'll be that. That sort of thing. And she said, oh no, there's people working on changing the orbit of the planet as the sun expands. So, and I'm just like, what are we all going to sit down and be like, beep beep, the earth is about to move? This idea that technology is going to save us from everything, I think is a little bit misguided. Anyways, that was a little too much. And then especially on postmodernism, I'm not sure exactly what the question was, but maybe the person who asked it could say a little bit more about the question on postmodernism. Or maybe I can find it here in the chat. Let's see. Sorry, I'm just not used to this platform. So I feel like a really old professor that doesn't know how to work the technology.
I'm not sure if it's Salwa. Salwa asked the question. I'm not sure if your question is just okay. What's your thought on postmodernism?
Okay, so yeah, so I think, I mean, that's a broad question, but I can give a broad answer too. No, my thoughts on postmodernism, I think because of globalization and pluralism, that is whatever you want to call it, that's what the postmodern condition is trying to identify, is that there's no longer a single solution. There never was, but we can't even live as if, right? So think about 200 years ago, well, and still there are some people today that live this way, but 200 years ago, right, our lives were just much smaller. We lived and died within a 100-mile radius of where we were born, usually a shorter period of time, right, because there wasn't advanced medicine. We didn't have communication technologies like we do, and so it was a treat to have somebody who was traveling through from far off places, right? When you're living in a world that's much smaller, it's much easier to believe that your community has the idea about the universe, right? But when you're living, when all these are mixed up through the space-time crunch of globalization, you know, who's wrong and who's, you know, there's so many different ideas and so many different ways of understanding the world that they can't all be wrong, right? Or, you know, they can't all be right either, but they can just be different, right? And so the way that I look at the postmodern sort of condition is not that it's not relativism, but it's about context, right? We don't make meaning willy-nilly out of nothing, as if we were these small gods creating everything out of nothing. No, we co-create meaning with the rest of the natural world around us. So we can agree, we can find common grounds to agree on things, right? I think that probably all of us on this session could agree on gravity, probably that we're all humans, probably that we're all mammals, that we need oxygen, we need water, so we have that we live on Earth, you know. So there are certain things that we can agree on. That doesn't mean those things are going to be true for all time and all places. There weren't always human beings in the world, and there probably won't always be human beings. The Earth wasn't always here, and it probably won't always. So it doesn't mean that all those things are true forever, but it means that for a time, the meaning that we make is in this common ground, right? And that helps to co-create the different types of realities that we live in on a day-to-day basis. So that to me is where sort of postmodernism, it's a turn to contextualism, embodiment, and the notion that there is no single perspective, but that we live in this multi-perspectival reality, right? Where there are a lot of different ways of understanding the world, and they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. So actually, the more perspectives we have on a given situation, just like think about the layers of maps that you can put on a specific place. You can have a geological map, a demographic map, a road map. All these things give us a better understanding of that place, right? They're not necessarily mutually exclusive. And so that to me is sort of this this idea of postmodernism and multi-perspectivalism. Yeah.
Thank you. So the next question was by Professor Jacob. She says, when you use the term romanticism, are you drawing at all upon the romantic transcendental movements responding to Enlightenment values?
Yes, I am, and you know, I think that along with my friend and colleague and you know, fellow traveler in this sort of like weird period of 19th century romantic science, Kaku von Stuckrad in Germany. Well, he's in the Netherlands, but anyways, he argues that sort of one of his big arguments is that Romanticism in Europe, and then of course later in the U.S., are the sort of remnants of the old pagan traditions that were left behind after the Catholic Church colonized Europe, right? And so these are the sort of pagan sensibilities that sort of fuel this type of romanticism. But when I use it, I'm definitely drawing from people like Goethe and Thoreau and even Ernst Haeckel, right? And other people of that ilk. Now, what I do want to argue is that sometimes this romanticism gets sort of attached to a naive romanticism, if you will, that sort of, oh, you know, if everyone would just have a true connection to the earth, right? Well, there's not just one true connection to the earth, right? And there's not just one right way of being connected with the rest of the natural world. We're all connected differently because of our embodiments and this sort of thing. And so that's where I want to take this romanticism a little bit out of that era. Although Haeckel and others, like Ernst Haeckel especially, knew that sort of when you place humans in an evolutionary perspective, that all interpretation was hermeneutic, because we weren't outside of nature to look over it in a God's eye view. We were a part of nature, so you had to interpret. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't want there to be a romanticism without that critical side of looking at embodiment and embodiment issues and all the isms that go along with the way we experience the rest of the natural world around us. On the one hand, and then also that sort of place. I want to loose romanticism from just a focus on a single place to the connection of places in the planetary community, right? So it's not just about attachment to one place, but the way in which these places connect together to build up the planetary community. because of course Romanticism was tied with nationalism in some scary ways, so on and so forth during the early 20th century. So.
Mm-hmm. Great. No, that's wonderful. I love this title. But just before Veronica, you continue, I do know Liz had her hand up, and I don't know if there was something you wanted to say, Liz. Let's give her a moment.
Thank you. Nope. I appreciate your responses to my questions. Yeah, awesome.
Sure. Thank you.
Great. Veronica, you can continue with the questions.
Okay. The next question is by Stephen. He says, any thoughts regarding deep adaptation as per Dr. Jem Bendel and the possibility that many humans don't make it through the bottleneck?
Hey, Stephen. Hope you're doing well. It's been a long time. I'll ask you to tell me more about deep adaptation and Jem Bendel, because I don't know a lot about this. So if you can say a little bit more.
Hey, great to see you, Dr. Bauman. So wonderful.
Likewise.
And thank you for the great presentation, and just right on time. I'm pretty much open, although I do have a real warm spot for panentheism. Dr. Jem Bendel posits the question that it's hard to come by a conversation, maybe even a taboo, to talk about the possibility that we don't make it, that there are cataclysmic changes as per climate change, poisoning our earth, water, and air, the earth that we live in, this idea of a lack of connection, an anti-biophilia, and E.O. Wilson, and that Jem Bendel from University of, I think, Cumbria, maybe, Cambria, he posits this idea that we need to have this conversation, this idea to have this conversation, that there a call for a deep adaptation in regards to the possibility that we can't outrun the climate change freight train that is slamming down on us right now. And that's, just that thought. And so I maybe tapping into your short-term optimism and your long-term pessimism.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you, Stephen. It's great to see you as well. I guess David Attenborough also recently said it's too late, right? I think a lot of people are saying it's too late, and I guess that I would approach it in terms of this short-term optimism, long-term pessimism, in some sense, and also with a little bit of sort of we need sort of palliative care for the planet and for our former ways of living that just won't be possible. We need environmental hospice, right? We need eco memorials. We need rituals, I think, to help us transition, because it's not just that we're used to living in a world that is not going to be the same anymore, and I think it's okay to mourn that, right? It's okay to mourn the loss of not just the human world, of course, of whatever. Consumerism and these sorts of things. It's okay to mourn that if that's the world you were born into and it's ending, right? Or flying around the world all the time, as I do. So it's okay to, I think, have a process by which you say goodbye to that, but also to the many species that are going extinct, to the places that are going to be forever changed, right? We need to have, I think, rituals of hospice and memorialization and these sorts of things, and burial for some of these things in order to get through it. I guess what I would go back to a little bit too is this idea of it does seem sort of overwhelming, of course, to think about the problems and the possibility of navigating these problems in such a complex way. But again, from communities that have already undergone apocalypse, right? I think we can learn how to create new narratives and how to keep worlds alive, although not the same world, but a different world, right? So what about the communities who have already experienced the apocalypse of their worlds? What can we learn in terms of rebuilding from those ashes, I guess. That's a start anyway to how I would answer that.
Thank you so much for that. And I agree with you completely. The memorialization and the ritual, creating rituals to connect, I think, and to establish that empathy with Earth and ourselves within it, I think will be extremely helpful going forward.
Well,
thank you so
much.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if there are any more questions here. I could just love one more thing. I mean, as I've said, it's just that this was such a wonderful presentation. But so, do you have any like recommendations on the undisciplining of the university?
Right. Well, I think it's part of it is sort of some of these, like, you know, the environmental humanities, energy humanities, thinking beyond sort of religion and science to things like the Schumacher Institute and in the UK is doing, or the California Institute for Integral Studies on the West Coast, right, has some interesting programs. But sort of, it's a reattunement of our knowledge to the context, and not just to the human context, because the sciences and the two general distinctions, the human sciences and the natural sciences, are both based upon the human, right? And so the very disciplines that structure the way we organize knowledge are both geared towards the human. And so how can we retool that so that the sciences are not, you know, mostly about technology transfer for human beings, and the humanities are expanded to understand meaning and value in a larger, you know, planetary community. And so again, I think there's, you know, the blue humanities and the energy humanities, or what, you know, there's I think there's lots of different little projects. But I mean, part of it is also going to be the sort of corporatization of the university system, especially in our country, and the way that things get funded, right? So I think it's a larger question about that too, in terms of how research gets funded, right? You know, the grants that you can get from the European Commission, right, Research Council, are just, they make the National Endowment for the Humanities look like just a kiddie pool. And so, like, we need to start having, I think, more independent bodies of research that are not just concerned about what they can get out of our knowledge, right, in terms of profit, but sort of just knowledge for the wonder at the natural world, wonder at the rest of the natural world. You know, this was a clear component of these romantic scientists, right? There wasn't science for, you know, production. It was science for wonder, right? And science is a spirituality. I mean, Ernst Haeckel wanted to turn evolution into a spiritual or new religion that would replace all other religions, right? So it wasn't about sort of how can we, you know, categorize everything so that we can make the best, most efficient use of it for human beings, right? And so, you know, my own thought is that we need, you know, something like another New Deal. I was hopeful that the Green Deal would do that too, but of course that hasn't panned out so far. Maybe maybe Uncle Joe will help get us back to that discussion. But the you know, the GI Bill transformed the university system after World War II, and that is one of the direct periods after that helped to lead to the civil rights movement, women's lib, the first gay rights movement, the first Earth Day, because all these people now could afford to go to the university. They didn't have high cost of healthcare. The university wasn't expensive. There were many different people that weren't just wealthy going to the university, so you had different perspectives on history and other forms of knowledge. And then you didn't have a world that said, oh, as soon as you graduate from college, you have to get a job so you can pay off your student loans and get healthcare, right? So people had time to sit and think, and just spaces for doing nothing. But sitting around and thinking, this is the kind of space we need. We need practices that help us, I think, slow down and sort of and get back into communication with people outside of our little bubbles. And we have those types of spaces have eroded so much, I think, as of late in the past 20 years, maybe since the Reagan years. I don't know where to put my finger on it, but that, you know, people are becoming more and more polarized, and at the same time, we're more and more in debt through education and healthcare and these sorts of things. So I think that it takes like these types of, you know, to me, you know, free education and sort of universal healthcare are environmental values. They are, I mean, to those two things, I think, would lead to such a different world, and it would provide people with so much more mental space and energy and time to think what it is we're doing, right? And I think that the more that you know, for most of us, the reason that we're still caught up in the fossil fuel world, and I include myself here, is because you know, we can't do it on our own. So we don't have time to address all these problems, and we don't necessarily have time to grow our own gardens and compost everything and make our own clothes and do all these sorts of things, right? Because we have to go to work and we have to we have to pay the bills and we have to, you know, all these sorts of things. So I'm not arguing for communism, but I am arguing for a better social network that allows us to have these sorts of conversations.
Yeah, that's great. A great answer. I also think to some of the, you know, our, I guess, traditional thinkers from the canon, like Aristotle, for instance, one thing I guess one lesson from him that I love is this idea that why do we need education? We need education so we know how to enjoy our leisure. Yeah. Right? And I think that's just a wonderful idea, that we have to learn to activate our sensibilities to be able to really appreciate a walk in the park, for instance. And
absolutely,
you know,
yeah. No,
yeah,
I think
really,
that's right. I think it's much more about these habits, right? And the sort of and I mean that sort of creating the habits and that channel our affects and our emotions and our desires and our dreams towards this wonder at the national world, rather than sort of the fossil fueled affects and the ones that keep us locked into the human world, right? So I think that's absolutely right. Is sort of this, you know, style ethics without maybe teleology or something. It's more about sort of
yeah.
how do you create habits of becoming that foster multiplicity and recognition of the wider you know, planetary community and that sort of thing. So
yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. Are there any other questions or comments that any of you have? Now's the time. Okay, so that there doesn't seem to be any other questions. So this was so enlightening and so enjoyable and also so hopeful. I mean, for me, you know, I think it's so important to remember that we can rethink ourselves, and that's what's, maybe if there's anything extraordinary about being human, I think that might be it, right? We have the ability to reconsider ourselves. And I think we've done that throughout history, really. We've reconsidered ourselves, and it's part of our survival mechanism too, right? To reconsider ourselves in light of what we face. And also not to think of living sustainably in a way that is sacrificial. You know, I think often we have that perspective, right? That, oh, I'm going to have to give up something. But which of course is from one perspective true, but also we have I think a lot to gain from a new way of thinking ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And I mean, I think that's like one of the main things that, you know, the environmental humanities can do is pivot towards this. What does this abundant life look like? What does the flourishing of the planetary community look like? What are we going to gain? You know, I mean, it's really awesome to be able to ride your bike everywhere and not have to be in a car, it's really awesome to have the time to make a beautiful dinner and not have to do fast food, right? It's really awesome to sort of grow your own things and be able to take walks and, you know, and have this, you know, that shouldn't just be a leisure for people that can afford it. That should be like incorporated into our everyday lives, and sort of how can we, you know, think about it as the sort of the time and the energy that we gain from this different way of living. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, and you're getting lots of love in the chat, just to let you know. So you should just take a look and see how inspiring you are. I'd like to remind everybody, if you can, please take the event survey. It's most helpful. And so thank you. Thanks everybody
so
for
much.
coming. Appreciate
Thank
your
you, Dr. Bauman. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bauman.
It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, for being a fantastic moderator.
Oh, thank you. You're welcome.
And thank you, Sarah, for organizing.
Yeah. And thank you, Earth Ethic Institute.
Mike, DEI, and yeah, the whole MDC group.
Yeah, great. Yeah, this is really wonderful. Yeah, thanks, Mike and everyone. That was so enjoyable. I so enjoyed that, and I've recorded it. So, with your permission, Whitney, I'll post it for just on my Blackboard sites, and maybe I can give it to Mike, and Mike can post it somewhere on the Earth Ethic Institute.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
I'm trying to collect the various videos from the symposium, so this would be great to have.
Okay, cool. I think Whitney might have gone, actually. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think so. I think he's vanished. Okay, so anyway, I'm going to log too.
Wait. Sarah, one quick question for you.
Yes.
Is it possible for you to capture your attendance sheet from your end as the originator of this meeting?